this past weekend, Memorial Day weekend, I wrote a piece about Memorial Day, kind of reiterating some themes I've played with before, talking about some of the people who died in my own family in war, including an uncle who I learned later was, when I went through his effects, was a very active member of the Young Communist League at UC Berkeley, which is an interesting. I found some interesting documents there. Write about someday. My grandfather fought in was career military, fought in World War One. But I also talked about the fact that we glorify deaths in the military, while, for example, we've already forgotten some 4 to 5 thousand teachers who gave their lives teaching during the COVID epidemic, some 2 to 3 thousand healthcare professionals who did the same, and which got me to thinking about the war psychology of this country. And on a parallel track, I think my good friend Richard Wolff was struck by some of the war-like utterances of our leadership class. So we thought it might be a good idea to speak with you about it. So first of all, Richard Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, RJ.
Well, we're always glad to have you, and even on such a grim occasion. And I think what struck you recently was the erstwhile presidential candidate Nikki Haley, right?
Yes, I must say, I was struck by the fact, and I suspect many Americans were, by the fact that the internet picked up and the media picked up a photo of Nikki Haley writing on a number of shells in some munitions dump in Israel, signing them with her name and uttering the phrase, writing the phrase, "finish them." And then I believe America, and then a heart and Israel. So the way that Nikki Haley deals with the complexities of the Palestinian-Israel issue is to cheer on in the grossest manner imaginable what she knows, unless the level of her ignorance is larger than what she has already shown us, which it could be. I understand that that's a possibility. I do not know her personally. But whatever it is she did before, she has outdone herself by cheering on what we can see almost every day is the mass slaughter of women and children in Gaza. It's a tone deafness. And, you know, you began, let me do it also. Most of my family was killed either in World War II or in the buildup of German fascism before that. And most Germans I've met in my life, whatever their view of Nazism might have been, none of them could have or would have or ever did, to my knowledge, anything as grotesque as wishing mass slaughter. You can agree with an Israeli perception of what went on without having to write, "finish them," as if you really are a cheerleader for killing. And I don't think it's a slip. I think you're right, RJ, that there's something manifested in this behavior that that really ought to worry Americans. It's a truism that a lot of people have said. If you live in a country that identifies the problems it faces as violent and military in nature, and therefore requiring a violent military response, then in some way, whether you intend it or not, you are training your own population to think like that. finish them is a sentiment that has already been and will for sure now be even more utilized by people struggling inside the United States for and against this or that issue. I mean, it's really extraordinary what we are seeing and the overlap. You know, she herself probably wrote that because she's got caught up in the Israeli Palestine issue and so sees it in a way that makes reasonable what she just did. My guess is she goes to church on Sunday and intones a commitment to the thou shalt not kill commandment. And she's saying, finish them, and doesn't notice the contradiction or what it might suggest about her religious commitments as well as all her others.
You know, I watched, to my own detriment, the Republican presidential debates. And in one of them, which was ostensibly on foreign and military policy, the moderator was one Kristen Welker, who is the new host, I believe, of Meet the Press. And she was inviting these various candidates, Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and this other motley crew, whatever, motley cast of characters was up on stage. What things like what would you say to Bibi Netanyahu if you could? And several of them, but especially Nikki Haley said it over and over, finish them, finish them. But they all said it, finish them, get the job done. I did a supercut of it, calling it America's Next Top Military Salesman Contest or something, because they were all just, we need this. And Nikki Haley was specifically, we need to upgrade these nuclear submarines. We need to build these nuclear missiles. We need to do this. We need to do that. So it seems to me that stands in sharp contrast with uh, what the way the Democratic Party represents itself, shall we say, which is it makes me think of a line that Neil Young actually wrote about George Bush Sr., which is a kinder, gentler machine gun hand. It seems to me the idea of the Democratic Party in government now certainly is to support an equally bloodthirsty foreign policy, especially in Gaza and the Middle East, while at the same time mouthing human rights platitudes. And honestly, there's a part of me that almost wants to say, if you're going to give it to us straight. It's almost worse to be sanctimonious about the rules-based order when there is no rule involved except death. In fact, Nikki Haley, ghastly as she may be, would not have had a missile to sign if it weren't for the Democratic administration of this country. So it seems to me that the only, Joe Biden just, after setting a red line in Rafah, now they're slaughtering people in Rafah. And of course, there was no red line. But it seems to me the red line that no one dare cross in American politics is to challenge or do anything but aid and abet this relentless slaughter. And I have thoughts about where that may come from, but I've been wondering what yours are.
Well, I don't want to become mystical, but the parallels are just too suggestive to not mention them. The United States as an entity was conceived and born in a massive slaughter of indigenous people.
Right.
And a large part of the more conservative elements in our society have never figured out quite how to look that in the eye and say something other than really stupid nonsense. I'm sure that Nikki Haley is part of that, maybe made worse because she has foreign influences that she tries to bury in favor of an Americanism that is, as one used to say, more papal than the Pope. Uh, the reality, the reality is that this country has never come to terms with what it did. It slaughtered the vast majority, specializing in women and children for actually quite similar reasons. To get rid of this population, children and women were the best way to do that because they're the procreative cause and result of population. Um, and I think it's been bred in. I think it's as deeply buried in the collective unconscious as is the fact that Puritans were a very important player in the early history of this country's white people and gave us this peculiar need to identify ourselves as chosen by God. Um, there again, the parallel with Israelis who think of themselves as chosen by God, etc. There's something there's something going on here that Mandela was much smarter. Mandela went to his own people and said, we have to have reconciliation. We have to go through you can speak what you're feeling. You can express your bitterness, tell your story. Everyone has to listen respectfully to what you have to say. But if we don't get beyond it, it will kill us. It will destroy us. And there's a wisdom in there, which Nikki Haley, I mean, putting Nikki Haley in the same sentence as Nelson Mandela is a disservice to Nelson, but, for the purposes of this argument, I think it's part of the American mentality, this language. I'm reminded of Donald Trump um, giving a campaign speech, if I remember back in the last election, and having some elderly person in the back of the auditorium trying, not very successfully, to heckle because they were so far back that it didn't do it. But you could see his face got red, and he ordered his security detail, throw him out of here. What? What? And I know that Joe Biden is capable of, well, look at what he's doing around the world now. He's telling us what he's capable of. But there's a kind of decorum that some politicians have learned that stuff is so ugly, don't do it. A little voice comes into their brain when the hustlers in the PR department of the Israeli army suggest, why don't you go over there and we'll get a picture of you signing the book. Some of us like to sign the bomb personally. No little voice goes off in the Nikki Haley. Nothing says, wait a minute. There's 1,000 ways for me to show which side I'm on. The Israelis know that's why I'm here. I'll say something, but I don't have to say something that really sounds like the mass killing of women and children is what I want to see finished. She doesn't have that little voice. She doesn't have a moral compass to tell her, you're going in the wrong direction, sweetie pie. This is not the place you want to end up being in, not this situation. It will be misunderstood, something. But she has nothing, nothing.
No, but to me, it's, I mean, to sort of carry on in the sort of quasi-Jungian vein, she and Trump and some others, I think they represent a kind of id of the American psyche, this kind of uh, usually unarticulated desire. Lust may not be too strong a term for, hey, look, I'll give you, I can enjoy a good revenge Hollywood movie as much as the next guy. it's very cathartic. It's very emotionally satisfying. And, I will go out on a limb here now and really go after a sacred cow and say, why do we call the World War II generation, for example, the greatest generation? It's true that they were involved in the most major war that the United States has ever faced. It's true that they fought, many of them died, um, including my own relatives. But why is greatness something that we only ascribe to acts of violence? Why is it, the historian Richard Slotkin wrote a book, a series of books actually, Regeneration Through Violence, Gunfighter Nation, about the power of the gun in the American psyche.
Right.
Why I fired, I used guns recreationally as taught by my father, but why do we, I just wonder if, to switch from Jung to Darwin for a kind of Darwinism for a second, if this is serving a function, uh, I guess maybe that's the way to phrase the question. If all this uh, cathartic addiction to violence and attraction to violent rhetoric and all that, sometimes tacit, sometimes expressed, as with Nikki Haley, if this serves a function, I wonder what it is.
Well, here's another way to get at it. I was struck over recent weeks when the universities that I've been associated with in my life, Yale University, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, the New School University here in New York City, all of them saw major demonstrations by students, joined in by a significant number of faculty, um, protesting the war, and particularly advocating a ceasefire in Gaza as a particular approach. And that was what they could agree on, since many of them had very different views about the causes of this situation and the best resolutions. And they agreed to disagree about those things. But the one thing they could all agree on, based on the kind of genuinely moral values that they all shared, that the mass slaughter of clearly innocent women and children was bad and should stop. The university got under pressure from major donors who, in most cases, favor Israel and don't favor Palestine, and who implicitly, but often also explicitly, threatened to withdraw funding that they provide. And Republican politicians piled on because this is their bread and butter and this is made to order for them. We suddenly discovered, having not said a word about it for the last 10 years, that anti-Semitism is everywhere in the air. A remarkable a shift of opinion that happened to coincide with Israeli foreign policy, which seeks to equate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, even though that issue should have been settled half a century ago when it was made crystal clear that that was not the case to almost everybody. That the response was not only to squelch the students, but to do it violently.
Mhm.
This is to call the police, not to sit down with the students, 99% of whom, and I've dealt with these students all my life, including the last few weeks. They don't want violence. They fear that violence will keep the students who agree with them from joining them, which it will, which is why it's there. reason for it is that, always has been, was in the anti-Vietnam War, it's the same story. But they used violence to squelch a movement against violence as the solution. And you know something? I'm noticing, and I don't think this is just wishful thinking on my part, I'm noticing among my colleagues, they're very uncomfortable. And I'm talking about those who supported the university, who supported calling in the police. They were a little taken aback when they saw the videos of the police hitting the students. That they didn't want. They wanted the police to be gentle in how they dealt with them. But once you get into a conversation, they are very uncomfortable in being, even in their own eyes, the bad guys here, the people who didn't go out there and push for a ceasefire. They'll give you reasons why a ceasefire isn't it, but that you can see in their faces, you can see in their eyes, they are trapped in their own ideology in a place they find very uncomfortable.
Yes, and I think they're right to be uncomfortable because I think history will not look on them and their like kindly at all. I mean, I think this is one, when you talk about the universities, the phrase, I used it last year, but it's more apt now that in a sense, the question of Gaza is a moral x-ray, and we're seeing the skull beneath the skin. You can mouth as a government, as a ruling elite, and whether you're talking about billionaire contributors to universities or leading politicians or media figures, you can mouth all the platitudes you want. But if your response to peaceful protest is massive police violence, if your response to what's going on in the Middle East is to support the extermination of women and children and the depopulation of a region, each of which is a classic, and the shootings or bombings, the deaths of more than 200 journalists, all of which fits the definition of war crime and or genocide. If you can see yourself doing that, I don't care if you call yourself a liberal, a progressive, conservative, you are on the wrong side, uh, plain and simple. And in a way, I have to be honest, I get the Republicans better in the sense that they have this sort of feral, uh, uncouth, hideous, knee-jerk violence. But the effing liberals, if we weren't on the air, I'd be filling out that word, who support this stuff, they say all the right things. How do you look at yourself? I swear to God, how do you look at yourself in the mirror? Are you just saying if you're in the news business, if you're in Congress, if you're at a think tank, do you just say to yourself, well, this is the way the world is? I mean, do you give yourself a kind of moral Nuremberg defense that, oh, I have to do this, I have to go along with this to keep my job? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I suspect we are witnessing, and maybe that's what frightens me sometimes a little. We're witnessing the internal disintegration of that vague entity, you know, community or solidarity or whatever it is that makes the different people in a community no longer willing to cohabit with
Mm.
others in that community, and beginning therefore to define them as the other, and where the other becomes progressively less tolerable, and you end up, writing finish them on the bomb. And then, that brings us to these comments about civil war uh, coming down the pike here in the United States. and being welcomed by a growing portion of the population, as best I can tell. And so, this is Nikki Haley, who is among those who would welcome this because it gives her a better feeling, since for quite a while, particularly after World War II, those ways of talking and thinking were pejoratized. They were linked to fascism. They were linked to the enemy behaviors in World War II, and you couldn't possibly say them. Now you can finish them, and you can cheer the International Criminal Court for issuing arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin, but it's a major moral issue if they want to do it for Netanyahu. I mean, wow, you're watching that the coming to fruition of that famous line. I think I actually asked you once, and you knew who said it, that the first casualty in every war is the truth. People start talking right out of their rear end about what's going on because they are so distressed by it that any contradictory factoid has to be smashed because it's too cognitively unbearable to have to deal with complexity when you need to be simply on the right side.
And let's think about the left for a second in all this before we end, because the real left, I mean, the left that you and I represent, not whatever, simulacrum is being projected now on the mansion walls somewhere. But we have, for example, Eugene V. Debs, who opposed World War One, calling it a war for capitalism. We have the anti-war left of the 1960s, which had, at times a very articulate case to make. We don't see signs of that kind of left now, but it seems to me one of the things that the left was able to offer uh, in place of and we can certainly talk about the Russian Revolution too and the role of war in that, but one of the things that the left has offered, and we've talked about this before, is a sense of purpose that does not need war in order to provide life with meaning and challenge and value and excitement. So I'm just wondering, there are some good anti-war left voices out there today. Oddly enough, some of us find ourselves bedfellows with libertarians of a certain stripe who will republish my work and probably yours in their newsletters because they agree that we should not, for different reasons perhaps, but that it's immoral to be running a empire, a global military empire. But an articulate left that understands the role of militarization, how it's come to dominate our politics and our economy and our society. It seems to me that's it's not a vacuum, as I say, because there are good people out there, but it seems to me, Uncle Lefty, Aunt Lefty needs you to join in this, like the posters with the big finger, to join in this. I'm not saying all wars are wrong. I'm not a pacifist, but to join the idea that, let's think twice before we take the ultimate step in human violence anywhere in the world. Let's see what alternatives are there. That used to be acceptable even in American political culture. We were okay with negotiating with the Soviets in the 1960s. We were okay with, at various points, negotiating with enemies. But in the last 20, 30 years, you can't even talk about a negotiated settlement to any conflict anymore, it seems. So I feel that we need a reinvigorated, anti imperialist, genuine left to take this on. But what are your thoughts?
I agree, but I also see it. I mean, I know maybe I'm in a minority about this, but I spend a lot of my time with young people.
Mhm.
I'm a university professor. The people talk to in the classroom are from 18 to 28 years of age, and early in their lifetimes. And I would say, without qualification, that they are more socially critical as a mass than they have ever been. Because you still have the small, and it is small, the small knot of maybe 10% of students who've had some sort of political education, either from their parents or from some teacher they got close to, or a minister, or somebody who conveyed to them just another way of thinking. They're there. But for most of my time in the United States, and I was one of them, we were a small group, 10%. On good days, maybe 15%. Now you have those 10%, but there's another 40 to 50%, who are halfway there. They're
Yeah.
not ready to be active, not at all. They don't even understand what that means. But they don't think they're getting a fair shake in this society. They don't think many other people like them are getting a fair shake. They are resentful. They are bitter. They cannot enjoy the standard of living of their parents. They know it. They don't hide from it. And they think about it. They wonder why that is. They are very responsive to social criticism of all kinds. And they're the people who enjoy responding to a Gallup poll, a person who asks them, which would you rather have, capitalism or socialism? They not only answer socialism, they enjoy the naughtiness. It's like it's like saying a bad word in an environment where you're not supposed to do that. But that's very important. They want to be that bad boy. And if you push back at them, capitalism, then they'll really go after you because they want to unload their anger, and you've given them the opportunity. I've seen that many times. They don't need me. And I shut up at that point, even when they make, analytical mistakes, because this is important. They need these cathartic moments, because when you say it, it can't quite scare you the way it still does for them. They know they are breaking a taboo, and they're exhilarated, but they're also a little scared about it. And they're navigating that tension. But that's way ahead of where we were before, way ahead. So,
And
I mean,
I think that's why the repression has been so fierce on campus too.
yeah,
I think in a sense that uh, the people we oppose, the people in power, in a way are thinking ahead of many of us on the left. They know how dangerous this is. They get it. They get exactly what you're saying, that these are very hopeful signs for people like us, which is why they're worried, and they should be worried. And I guess in closing, all I would say is, as an old guy, is despite my youthful joie de vivre, I am an old guy, that hey, I'm willing to just be a librarian for them and sit at my desk. And if they're curious, it's like, well, you might want to check out this thing that happened in 1890, or you might want to, this person said this in 1929. That's it. That's it. Just, kind of respectful service to the force that I certainly hope is growing in power. But what's
yes,
your
and I think they're doing that, RJ. In fact, whether we intend it or like it or don't, that is happening. They are picking up, looking for, and finding the professor who will help them, the book that will clarify, the article that opens their eyes. And I think one last thing about the people who may be ahead of us. I'm not so sure they're ahead of us, but I am sure about this. They expected that the whole country would fall in line and join in the demonization of Mr. Putin.
Right.
They expected that everybody would join and get in line with demonizing Palestinians and celebrating with great empathy Israel's suffering on the 7th of October. And they were wrong. They misunderstood the right wing, which has no use for that Ukraine war at all, and may very well stop it if Trump wins. And they're completely, that at least they could try to dismiss as Republican obtuseness or Republican lack of awareness. But when their own children in their own elite bastions of liberal democratic thinking turn out to not agree with them at all, they are very strange. Yes, they have to act out. They had that was a cold shower for them. And you could see their overreaction. I'm not going to give you my money, or I'm going to pillory, the president of Harvard and drive her out of her job. What are you doing? First time you get a black woman in such a job, you hound her out after a number of days. How do you think that plays, you crazy people? And they're the ones who love these images the most, and they're backed into a corner. They can't stop that from happening. They don't want to, but they don't want to be the recipients of what goes with that. And you're quite right. History will make a very, very short. They will be pilloried from now on, and it'll hurt their feelings for the rest of their lives.
From your lips to God's ears, as they used to say, although I will phrase it more secularly next time. But as always, such an important topic, I have to say. I'm so glad we had this conversation. So as always, Richard Wolff, economist, economic historian, professor, host of Economic Update. As always, thanks for your thoughts. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you, RJ, and look forward to doing it again in a couple weeks.
As do I. We depend on your support here at the 0 Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.